Black homeless veteran faces trial. But when judge recognizes him, courtroom stands in respect. Outside a small corner store in a quiet part of town, Isaiah sat quietly on a weathered bench. At 62, his face told stories of hard times, long nights sleeping under the stars, and battles fought both abroad and at home. He wasn't just any man. Isaiah was a veteran, a soldier who had served his country with honor. But in this moment, to the police officers watching from across the street, he was just another homeless black man to be dealt with and forgotten. When the officers arrived, their eyes didn't see the years Isaiah had spent in uniform. They didn't see the sacrifices or the pain hidden beneath his worn jacket. Instead, they saw a problem. A man to be locked away, quickly and quietly. No questions asked, no second thoughts. Isaiah stayed calm. He didn't resist or shout. He simply sat, hands folded in his lap, waiting silently as the officers approached. But the peace he tried to hold on to was fragile. The officers moved fast, pushing him to his feet, roughly cuffing his hands behind his back. When Isaiah's head hit the cold concrete, the sharp pain was nothing compared to the weight of being erased, not just from the streets, but from the very system he had once sworn to protect. Meanwhile, Nina Clay, a young public defender, was handed Isaiah's case. At 27, Nina had seen many clients, many stories that seemed hopeless. But something about Isaiah's file felt different. His name was unfamiliar, but the scars in his record were deep. The charges against him were serious. But the truth behind those charges was unclear. Nina felt a pull, a quiet but powerful urge to find out who Isaiah really was. From the moment Nina met Isaiah, she sensed layers beneath the surface. He spoke little, but his eyes held a clarity that didn't match his worn appearance. There was something important in his silence, a story waiting to be told. As she looked into his steady gaze, Nina knew this wasn't just about a trial. It was about justice, real justice, for a man who had been invisible for too long. She began to ask questions others ignored. Why had Isaiah's military records vanished? How could a man who once led missions now sleep behind a church dumpster? What had caused this erasure? The answers didn't come easy. The system was quiet, protective of its secrets. But Nina was determined. With each document she pulled, with every conversation she had, the pieces started to fit together. Pieces of a life erased, a man forgotten by those who owed him respect. And so began a fight, not just for Isaiah's freedom, but for his dignity, for the truth that the world had tried to bury. Nina knew the road ahead would be tough, filled with obstacles designed to keep Isaiah invisible. But for the first time in a long while, Isaiah had someone on his side, ready to shine light into the darkness. As the city moved on, passing by without a glance, Nina promised herself she wouldn't let Isaiah's story go unheard. Because every life matters, every story deserves to be told. And sometimes, the quietest voices have the most powerful truths. Nina Clay sat in her small, cluttered office, staring at the thin file labeled Isaiah Boone. The more she looked, the more the pieces didn't add up. Isaiah wasn't just a homeless man accused of petty crimes. There was something much bigger hidden beneath the surface. She started digging. The usual background checks came up almost empty. No recent records, no social media, no financial history. It was as if Isaiah had vanished from the world. But then, a faint thread appeared, a mention of a military unit, something called the Special Joint Task Command. It was a name Nina hadn't heard before, and when she searched for it, most information was redacted or classified. A secret unit, involved in missions no one talked about. Nina's heart raced. Isaiah had told her little during their meetings, just a few words. 1st Recon Special Joint Task Command. It sounded important, but why was there no record? Why had his service, his very identity as a soldier, been wiped away? At night, Isaiah moved through the city's shadows. To most people, he was invisible, just another homeless man shuffled along by strangers who looked the other way. But inside, Isaiah carried memories that no one could see. Memories of war, zones, of impossible choices, and of a team who had trusted him with their lives. The streets were harsh, but even harsher was the feeling that the country he had served had forgotten him. One cold morning, Nina visited the small church where Isaiah slept behind dumpsters. The sanctuary's doors were locked, but the groundskeeper had come to accept Isaiah's presence quietly, a small mercy in a world that often turned its back. She watched him gently feed a stray dog, the only company he had for many days. The dog's soft eyes and Isaiah's gentle hands told a story of loneliness and quiet strength. Back at the courthouse, Nina pulled up arrest records connected to the officers who had taken Isaiah in. A troubling pattern emerged. These officers had a history, a trail of arrests targeting homeless veterans, all with similar charges, all ending the same way: guilty pleas, lost lives, erased stories. Nina's frustration grew. This was no accident. It was a system, carefully designed, to silence the vulnerable. People like Isaiah were easy targets, forgotten men and women with no one to speak for them. And worse, some officers seemed to take pride in keeping them invisible. She remembered Isaiah's calm, steady eyes, and the way he had corrected her gently when she mispronounced his unit's name. This was a man who had lived a life of discipline and honor. Why was that erased? Who wanted him forgotten? Every document Nina uncovered, every whisper she followed, led her deeper into a maze of silence and secrecy. The more she learned, the clearer it became. Isaiah was not just a homeless veteran. He was a man erased from history, buried under lies and false charges. Determined, Nina reached out to veterans groups and contacts with knowledge of classified military operations. Few spoke openly, but a former Army medic recognized the tattoo on Isaiah's wrist, a symbol of a covert unit no one admitted existed. The stories they shared were dangerous, stories of missions so secret, even Congress barely knew. Soldiers, sent on impossible missions, ordered to silence truths too powerful to be heard. As Nina pieced together Isaiah's past, she realized this case was no longer just about a wrongful arrest. It was about uncovering a conspiracy that reached far beyond the courtroom. Powerful forces had tried to erase Isaiah because he knew too much, because he refused to be silent. Back on the streets, Isaiah felt the weight of years, the nights filled with restless memories, the days spent in quiet solitude. His past haunted him, but he held on to a thread of hope that someone would see him, that someone would fight for him. And now, with Nina stepping into that fight, Isaiah was not invisible anymore. Black homeless veteran faces trial, but when judge recognizes him, courtroom stands in respect. Nina Clay sat in her office, the weight of Isaiah Boone's case pressing heavily on her shoulders. The deeper she dug, the darker the picture became. It wasn't just about a homeless veteran caught in the system's cracks. This was something much bigger, a web of corruption stretching through the police department and beyond. She reviewed reports from other homeless veterans, each case eerily similar: arrested on minor charges, evidence planted, witnesses pressured, and guilty pleas forced. The same officers kept appearing, the trio who had taken Isaiah in. Their records showed a disturbing pattern: countless arrests of vulnerable people, mostly homeless, many veterans, all accused of crimes they likely didn't commit. Nina felt a chill. These weren't mistakes or bad days. This was a calculated effort to silence people society already ignored. She reached out to a local journalist who had been quietly investigating police misconduct. Together, they started connecting the dots, sharing files and testimonies. The journalist had uncovered whispers about a group of officers who targeted homeless veterans, pushing them into courtrooms where justice was a stranger. Meanwhile, Isaiah's story grew more personal. Through whispered conversations with Nina, fragments of his past surfaced. A wife who had waited for him while he served overseas, a young daughter taken from him by a system that saw him as broken rather than brave. The accident that had claimed his wife's life, suspicious and never fully investigated. The nightmares that followed, pulling him further away from a world that no longer felt like home. Nina's heart ached as she listened. Isaiah was not just a case file. He was a man crushed under the weight of betrayal, forgotten by those who should have protected him. But the dangers were real. Nina began receiving subtle threats. A message slipped under her office door. "Stop digging." Her phone buzzed with unknown numbers. Whispers in the courthouse warned her to back off. Still, she pressed on. One night, after hours, she met Isaiah's daughter, a determined young woman pursuing law, fighting to understand the father she barely knew. Together, they pieced together family memories and letters, building a picture of a man who had fought battles on every front. Isaiah's daughter shared her own pain, growing up believing her father had abandoned her, struggling with a foster system that offered little comfort. She had searched for him for years, following faint clues and fading photographs. Their reunion was quiet but powerful. In that small room, father and daughter connected through shared loss and newfound hope. As Nina continued her work, a brave officer from within the department stepped forward, someone who had witnessed the corruption but feared for his own safety. He revealed how evidence had been planted, reports falsified, and threats made against those who dared speak out. The truth was dangerous, and the forces behind it powerful. But Nina knew that exposing this web of corruption was the only way to bring Isaiah's story to light and to protect others like him. Together, with allies from the press, the community, and the law, Nina and Isaiah's family prepared to face the battle ahead. It wouldn't be easy. The system was built to protect itself, but for Isaiah, for his daughter, and for the forgotten veterans, the fight for justice had begun. The morning of Isaiah Boone's trial arrived with a heavy sense of anticipation. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Veterans, in worn uniforms, community members holding signs demanding justice, and journalists eager to witness a case that had captured the city's attention. The air buzzed with whispers, hope, and tension. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Uniformed officers sat in silent rows, their presence a quiet reminder of the power they wielded. On the other side, Isaiah sat quietly beside Nina Clay, dressed in a simple suit provided by his daughter. For the first time in years, Isaiah looked like the man he truly was. A soldier, not just a homeless man. The judge entered, his face serious, carrying the weight of the case with him. As he called the court to order, the room settled into a tense silence. The trial was about to begin. The prosecutor wasted no time, painting a picture of Isaiah as a dangerous, unstable man, a vagrant who threatened the safety of the community. His words were sharp, filled with the kind of certainty that often comes from a place of power, not truth. He promised the jury evidence of Isaiah's aggression and resistance during the arrest. Then Nina rose to speak. Her voice was steady and clear, but filled with quiet passion. She told the jury about Isaiah's service, about a man who had risked his life for his country, only to be discarded when he returned. She spoke of the truth behind the charges, false reports, planted evidence, and a deliberate attempt to silence Isaiah. Nina's words hung in the air like a challenge, a call for the jury to look beyond the surface and see the man beneath the accusations. The prosecution's first witness was the store clerk, whose testimony echoed the false narrative of aggression, but Nina was prepared. When she presented surveillance footage from a nearby camera, the grainy video told a different story. Isaiah standing quietly at the counter, making no threats, showing no violence. The clerk's confidence wavered, his story unraveling under Nina's calm questioning. The jury shifted in their seats, doubt creeping in. Next came the police officers involved in Isaiah's arrest. Their testimony was a rehearsed dance of accusations, claims of resistance, threats, and disorder. But Nina's cross-examination was precise, exposing contradictions, impossibilities, and holes in their story. Then came the unexpected. A body camera recording surfaced, brought forward by a courageous officer who had witnessed evidence planting. The courtroom fell silent as the video played, showing one officer slipping a switchblade into Isaiah's bag while his partner watched. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Even some of the officers present exchanged uneasy glances. The poor judge banged his gavel, demanding order. The prosecution's case was crumbling, and the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. Isaiah sat tall, his eyes steady and clear. For the first time in months, he felt seen. But the battle was far from over. Behind the scenes, whispers of pressure and threats circulated. Powerful figures watched closely, unwilling to let their secrets be exposed. Nina knew the path ahead would be dangerous, but the courtroom was her battlefield, and she was ready. As the day ended, Isaiah and Nina shared a quiet moment. No words were needed. The fight for justice was underway, and together, they would face whatever came next. As the trial moved into its second day, a quiet tension settled over the courtroom. The initial shock of the body cam footage had faded, but its impact lingered, in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Everyone knew this case was no longer just about Isaiah Boone. It was about exposing a truth that had been buried for years. Then came a moment no one expected. The courtroom doors opened, and an older man in a crisp military uniform entered. His steps were steady, his posture proud despite his age. He carried with him decades of service and a story that could change everything. This was a retired general who had once commanded the very unit Isaiah had served in. He stepped forward, with quiet authority, his voice calm but unwavering as he addressed the court. "I am here to testify on behalf of Staff Sergeant Isaiah Boone," he began, his eyes meeting Isaiah's across the room. This man served with distinction in missions that required courage, precision, and honor. He was one of the finest soldiers I have ever had the privilege to lead. He spoke of impossible choices made in war zones, of missions shrouded in secrecy, and of a soldier who stood firm in his principles, even when orders demanded otherwise. He told the courtroom about the operation Isaiah refused to erase, evidence of crimes committed by powerful people, evidence Isaiah risked everything to preserve. The general's testimony painted a vivid picture of bravery and betrayal. He spoke of Isaiah's honorable discharge being stripped away unjustly, of a deliberate erasure meant to silence a man who knew too much. As the general finished, the courtroom was filled with a mixture of awe and sorrow. Veterans in the audience sat straighter, some with tears in their eyes, recognizing the truth of a brother in arms finally standing in the light. Then, the judge surprised everyone. He stood, his voice carrying a weight that filled the room. "This man," he said, gesturing toward Isaiah, "served this country with honor. I have reviewed records from my time as a JAG officer, and I know his name and his deeds." The judge's words were more than just acknowledgement. They were an apology for years of silence and neglect. "Everyone, please rise," he commanded. The Tikitin courtroom rose as one. The jury, the spectators, the officers, even the bailiff and court reporter. Cameras flashed despite the rules, capturing the moment when a man who had been invisible for so long was finally seen and honored. Isaiah stood, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in years, he felt recognized, not as a homeless veteran, not as a troublemaker, but as a hero. But not everyone stood. One officer, the one who had led the arrest, remained seated, his face twisted with anger. He stormed toward the exit, but the judge's sharp call brought him back to his seat. The tension in the room was palpable. Behind closed doors, the fight intensified. Powerful people threatened to bury the case, to protect their own, to silence the truth again. But the judge, now burdened with the weight of his conscience, resolved to see justice done. Outside, the crowd grew louder. The story was no longer hidden in shadows. It was breaking into the light, inspiring hope and demanding change. Isaiah's battle was far from over, but in that courtroom, a powerful truth had emerged. Honor cannot be erased, and the courage to stand for what is right will always find its voice. The courtroom buzzed with an energy that hadn't been there before. The general's testimony and the judge's heartfelt acknowledgement had shifted the course of the trial. Isaiah Boone was no longer just a homeless man on trial. He was a symbol of resilience, courage, and the fight against a broken system. The prosecution's case began to crumble rapidly. Faced with mounting evidence of police misconduct, planted evidence, and fabricated reports, the district attorney's office had no choice but to move toward dismissing all charges against Isaiah. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the judge formally dismissed the case, declaring Isaiah not guilty on all counts. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. Veterans standing side by side with community members raised their voices in celebration. For many, Isaiah's victory was about more than one man. It was a beacon of hope for all those forgotten by the system. Isaiah, overwhelmed by the moment, stood tall, saluting the crowd with a steady hand. Tears streaked down his weathered face, washing away years of pain and invisibility. Beside him, his daughter held his arm, her eyes shining with pride and relief. After years of separation, they were finally reunited, not just as family, but as allies in a shared journey toward healing. But the battle was far from over. Behind the scenes, investigations into the police department accelerated. Internal affairs officers seized files, interrogated officers, and uncovered a decade of corruption targeting homeless and vulnerable citizens. The officers who had wrongfully arrested Isaiah faced criminal charges, and their careers unraveled under the weight of truth. Federal agencies took a deeper interest, connecting the dots between Isaiah's military past and the systemic efforts to silence him. Officials resigned under mysterious circumstances, and whispers of a larger conspiracy echoed through the halls of power. Meanwhile, Nina Clay found her work gaining national attention. Her tireless advocacy and fearless pursuit of justice earned her awards and recognition, but more importantly, it inspired a movement. She helped launch a foundation dedicated to defending veterans like Isaiah, those who had served bravely but were cast aside and targeted unfairly. Isaiah found new purpose in this chapter of his life. No longer invisible, he began mentoring young people in his community, sharing his story of resilience, sacrifice, and the power of standing up for truth. He adopted a rescue dog, naming him Bravo after his old unit, a symbol of loyalty and new beginnings. The city itself began to change. A small bronze plaque was placed near the corner where Isaiah had once slept, a quiet but powerful tribute to all homeless veterans. The inscription read simply, "In honor of those who served their country but found no home upon their return. We see you now." Though the scars of the past ran deep, Isaiah, Nina, and his daughter Aliyah faced the future with hope and determination. Their story became a rallying cry, a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, can be won through courage and persistence. As Isaiah stood at the city's war memorial, tracing the names of fallen comrades, he whispered a promise: to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. His fight was not just his own, it was for every invisible voice silenced too long. The journey ahead would still be hard. Systems of power were slow to change, and battles against corruption rarely ended with one victory. But Isaiah's story proved one thing above all: the truth matters. It matters enough to be fought for, no matter the cost. After the trial, Isaiah Boone's life changed in ways he had never imagined. He was free, not just from the false charges, but from the weight of years spent invisible and forgotten. Yet, freedom wasn't just a word. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild a life that had been nearly erased. Isaiah didn't seek fame or fortune. What he wanted most was simple: dignity, the respect every person deserves, no matter their past or their struggles. Slowly, he began to find that dignity again. His daughter, Aaliyah, became a constant presence in his life. Their reunion, once quiet and fragile, grew into a strong bond. They shared stories, laughter, and tears. There were awkward moments. Years apart had created walls, but each day, those walls crumbled a little more. Isaiah saw in her the same strength and determination that had carried him through his darkest times, and Aaliyah saw her father not just as a stranger, but as a hero. Isaiah found purpose in helping others. He began volunteering at a community center, mentoring young people who felt invisible and unheard. He told them about his military service, the courage it took, the sacrifices made, but also about the battles after the uniform came off. He shared his message clearly: your story matters, your voice matters. Even when the world tries to silence you, you must stand and be heard. One day, Isaiah adopted a rescue dog, a medium-sized mutt with one missing leg he named Bravo, after the loyal companion he had imagined through his years of hardship. Together, they walked the city streets, past the corner where Isaiah once slept. Nearby, a small bronze plaque now stood, honoring homeless veterans like him, a symbol that they were no longer invisible. Nina Clay continued her fight beyond the courtroom. Inspired by Isaiah's story, she helped establish the Veterans Justice Foundation, an organization dedicated to defending veterans who faced injustice and neglect. With Isaiah as an advisor, the foundation grew into a beacon of hope, offering legal support, advocacy, and a voice to those who had long been silenced. The police department faced reckoning. Officers who had abused their power were held accountable. The system's cracks were exposed, sparking conversations about reform and accountability. Though change was slow and imperfect, the foundation laid by Isaiah's case gave others the courage to speak out. For Isaiah, the most meaningful recognition came years later. One morning, a letter arrived from the Department of Defense. His dishonorable discharge was overturned and replaced with an honorable one, with distinction. The Medal of Valor, denied for so long, was finally awarded. A handwritten note from a senior official expressed deep regret for the injustices Isaiah had suffered and gratitude for his unwavering service. Isaiah read the letter quietly, a small smile touching his lips. "It doesn't change the past," he said softly, "but it matters for the future, for my future, for Aaliyah's future, for everyone's future." Years after the courtroom drama ended, Isaiah stood before a group of teenagers at the community center. The room was filled with young faces, some worn by hardship, others cautious but hopeful. Isaiah held up his old military jacket. "This uniform doesn't make you a hero," he told them. "What you do after you take it off, that's what counts." He spoke of the strength in standing up, even when it's hard, of the power in telling your story, even if your voice shakes. Isaiah's message was simple, yet profound. You matter. Your story matters. Behind him, Nina and Aaliyah watched, proud of the man Isaiah had become. His story, once buried and ignored, had become a light for others, a call to courage, a reminder that justice can be fought for, even when the odds seem impossible. The city around them was changing, slowly waking to its own failures and hopes. Systems of power were still strong, but so were the voices rising to challenge them. Isaiah's journey from invisibility to vindication was a testament to that. And as Isaiah looked out at the faces before him, he knew the fight wasn't over, but it was worth every step, because in every story told, In every voice heard, there is hope. And with hope comes change.